So our feature speaker today, Na Na Nyaboke, Faith. I will call you Faith because I don't want to move that.
That's fine. That's fine, Ken.
Okay. Um, Faith is from Kenya, but she works in an organization called Sense International. And Faith, let's kind of start out this conversation by first learning a little bit more about you. Can you tell us about yourself?
Okay. As you know, my name, or on my screen, my name is Nyaboke Faith Omache, which is a traditional Abagusi name. Now that Kenya has like around 42 or more tribes, so I come from the Abagusi tribe. Uh, Essentially, my name means honey, so that is just on a side. So that is the book, the one that you're struggling with, Ken. So that's my name. So my qualifications or my area of background or expertise comes with I have a bachelor's degree in special needs education, currently completing my master's in community development. My specific area of interest is disability, of course, disability advocacy and inclusion. A lot of conversations talk about disability, but the element of practicality and how we're doing it is what has driven me into the conversation around disability. I'm passionate. I usually say you'd rather do something else to someone else who is able to advocate or speak up for themselves, but don't do it to someone without disability, or the one that you consider voiceless, quote unquote. So my career life has been fully in disability. I usually tell people I eat, sleep, and think disability. It's my plan A to Z. Because for those who are Christian, I would say I'm a Christian myself. So I would say this is my calling and this is how I give back to the community. I started my career in working as a functional assessment officer at the Kenyan Institute of Special Education, which is the national body that does assessment and screening of children with disability, but also does training of teachers in special needs education. So that is where I started my career as a special needs assessor. I would assess children for screening of the types of disability and then do what you're calling educational placement and referral or linkages to appropriate institutions or where the referral pathways when it comes to interventions. Then also majorly worked with institutions, schools, the institute itself in making sure that we are having ways that our support programs were very inclusive. When it comes to placement of children in schools, this is whereby we would now work with the teacher hand in hand to making sure that the support that the children are getting within the school environment was very inclusive and majorly championed inclusive education and having children placed in mainstream schools rather than special institutions to avoid institutionalization. Then I moved now to, after working there for a while, I moved to Sense International. The question why I moved to Sense International essentially came from I was screening and now sending children to schools, and I was not majorly providing solutions because once the child has moved to a school, that is where our relationship or our partnership ends with the parent. But when it comes to Sense International, the unique thing is the aspect of the life cycle approach, whereby now you are part and fully involved within the life cycle of this individual that has been enrolled into the programs that Sense International does. So you have parental involvement, you have stakeholder involvement, you have, different types of interventions, and you are fully engaged in the life of the individual to see them transiting. I usually have a happy dance that we usually give to see these. When you see a child who, quote unquote, was considered somebody who was inadequate within the society, transiting to different steps of their life. So career-wise, that has been it. And then I took a short break, a detour, and moved to UNICEF regional office, where I worked with the disability inclusion team across 21 countries, where we were working to see all programs in WASH, social policy, social protection, education, nutrition, child protection were all disability inclusive. It was a very small team, but we had a very huge impact to seeing the programs within UNICEF were very inclusive. Unfortunately, due to the funding aspects, the regional office, as you may be aware, maybe, or you may not be aware, is coming to disbandment, and they're now setting up technical hubs. And I went back to my home where I love since international's programming. And now I work as a program officer in early intervention, working, as we said, we work in a life cycle approach. So our transition processes within the programs are something that I love about Sense International. Yeah, that is me career-wise. Personal life, I'm a new mom in the block. I have a boy who is older, like around 8 years, and then I have a small baby girl who is 6 months old. Yeah, that is me in a nutshell.
Super. Thank you, Faith. You're a very busy person, but I know you have a great passion for what you do. So when you're so passionate about something, being busy is a good thing.
Yeah.
So hey, let's talk a little bit about. So I know you touched upon Sense International. Can you, tell us what Sense International is?
Okay. So the history of the birth of Sense International comes from Sense UK, which is like our mother organization per se, because it gave birth to Sense International. So Sense UK is approximately 70 years old, and around 30 years ago, it gave birth to Sense International. So Sense International are the, can I say, entities or the NGOs from other parts of the country that build up to Sense International. So we are in 8 countries, whereby we have Sense in Africa, we are in 3: Sense International Kenya, Sense International Uganda, and Sense International Tanzania. Then we are in Romania, Europe. We are in Peru, South America, Nepal, Bangladesh, and India. So those are the countries that we are in, and all our programming actually across the Sense Internationals are all similar. So then our HQ offices is in the UK. So we have Sense International UK too. So we have Sense and then Sense International in the UK. So that is how Sense International is. So it started as a charity organization, parent-led, that has brought about now conversation and a lot of advocacy in the area of deaf blindness and multisensory impairments.
Okay,
Okay.
great. So let's talk about let's first kind of define what because you work with children with sensory disabilities. Can you define for me what sensory disabilities are?
Okay. Usually when we say sense international, the first thing somebody asks you, is it like sense, the common sense or the five senses? So we're looking at when I talk about multisensory impairment, we're talking about the five sensory aspect, but we deal wholly in two senses: hearing loss and visual loss. So that is deaf blindness in a larger aspect. And you would find in the multisensory, the other multisensory impairments come with the comorbidities of certain types of disabilities. We have a case of, let's say, like cerebral palsy, which comes with, issues with orientation and mobility, hearing loss or visual loss, and their rate of development. So in most cases, the categories of disabilities that we work with, even if they have a sensory loss, you might have a primary disability, maybe, physical disability, autism, you have ADHD or learning difficulty, but a secondary disability of sensory loss qualifies you into programming of Sense International. But that is not the case. Also, you have to be a high dependence or high support need, because in most cases you find that there are many entities or organizations that work with single sensory impairment, like hearing loss alone, visual loss alone. So that single sensory aspect of it, there are organizations that are doing that. So we specialize in making sure that the cadre that is forgotten among the other conversations with disability is what we are now specializing in.
Okay, so it's am I correct in understanding what you're saying that it's more than hearing and sight
Yeah.
disabilities? Is that
Yes.
what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so but today we're going to focus on the hearing and the sight disabilities.
Yes.
Um, I would be interested to know what your day is like. What kind of things can you give us some examples of the type of things that you do?
Okay, so I would say, like as we said, we take a life cycle approach, and our programming is in three key areas of or what we do on a daily basis. We do have early intervention programs, whereby now you'd find that we are screening children from birth to around 4 years old for hearing loss and visual loss. Reason being that in our country right now, we do not have that service. We do have it in our maternal books as part of what should be seen when the child is delivered or has come to the hospital. But the aspect is we do not look at the functionality. So in adverse affect, like for hearing loss, unless the child becomes school going or the parent realizes that they are having issues with speech or something else or difficulties in education, then now you'd find that that is when they think about hearing loss. But then you'd see if it is not, if we do it early, the screening and identification is done early, then if this child is able to benefit from a hearing aid or an other assistive device, if the issue was, health and infection in the ear that would have been otherwise treated early, not leading to deafness, it would have been catered for then. So the early intervention aspect of it is to make sure that we are mitigating the adverse effects of disability itself. So once the children are screened, we are enrolling them in an early intervention program. So early intervention programs, that is where, so as I had said, they're screened for visual and hearing loss and rate of development. So with this combined, then they go into the early intervention programs where we have occupational therapists and working with other specialists within the hospital. As I had forgotten to say that this programming is done within the hospital setting because of at these ages of 0 to 4, that is where most children lie. They lie into the Ministry of Health in our country. So the interventions are done from the hospital. So we have these intervention units within the hospitals. Secondly, we have programming in now. We've been able to set up the first audiological services in a public hospital in our country, whereby now, as a continuity of screening, they are now able to get hearing aids fitting, they are able to get their hearing aids and aftercare services, follow up, and even auditory and verbal therapy, speech therapy being done for the children themselves within the hospital. That is happening in two counties in our country, that is Garissa and Kwale County. I'm sorry if it's a mouthful, but that is how we're going about it. But within the aspect of it, we're working with community health promoters that are people from, these are a cadre of staff that works within the Ministry of Health but come from the community, and they're in charge of households from the community. We also work with the health professionals, that is clinicians within the hospitals, and they are all trained on disability awareness, and even the screening aspect of it comes from the hospital, and the intervention is also within the hospital setting. The reason for this is for sustainability. These are all government officials. So once the project comes to an end, there is a continuity of the services. And we are happy to say that since we started in 2020, back in 2020, we would see, even when the project cycle or the project comes to an end, there's a continuation of the services within the county itself. Major success is by the fact now that the county has recognized early screening or the need of early screening and intervention in their county integrated development plans. I would say counties are like small governments within the country itself that are, decide on the budgets and how the area is going to work and what is their priority. So having this as a priority is a major win, because therefore it means that they are able to allocate resources when it comes to staffing and budgeting. They're able to plan for early intervention services. So then
Okay.
we go into inclusive education. And again, we work in mainstream schools, supporting children with disabilities within a mainstream classroom, and then also in a home-based setting. And I think more of this I will elaborate as we go on within our conversation. And then now we go into the TVET setting or the vocational institute. So it's a life cycle approach. So essentially, in our day-to-day, our conversations are either with government, our partners on the ground, and us doing the implementation or the monitoring aspect of it.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
Glenn.
So, let's go into the classroom. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And so how do you ensure the child with sensory disabilities fully feels included in the classroom? What is your approach to that?
So our approach to that is we have a card that has been, in other countries, the UK and other countries have been implementing what you're calling the learner support assistant. So in our country, we didn't have that. So what we did, we started with by having conversations with the government on the need and the necessity of having a learner support assistant. This is an individual or this is not a teacher. Let me be clear. This is not a teacher, but this is someone who is specifically supporting the child. They are not teacher aides. They are not, classroom aides or any other thing, but they are the learner's individual support system. So they do the things that the teacher is not able to do. Issues with ADL, activities of daily living, when it comes to toileting, feeding, additional classroom work. That is what the learner support assistant does. So our advocacy with the government came when we did a study and research and conversations with the government, seeing that there was a very huge gap in supporting inclusive education. And there was a conversation, yes, our policies are geared towards inclusive education, but we didn't know how to do it. Because again, the special needs teacher are either found in special schools or those who are found in a classroom setting are overwhelmed. So that is where the learner support comes in. And what we did was, now develop a curriculum which now is recognized by the country, by the government itself, an institute called the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, and it was trained by the Kenya Institute of Special Education. And then now this becomes government staff. Again, I would say in quote, because they are not yet employed or deployed by the government. So our advocacy and conversation is, yes, they are now recognized in our sector policy. Our policies does recognize them, but they are not yet implementing this aspect of it. So where we are now doing in our programming, as we talk about inclusive education, now that is what we are doing. Our pilot projects are to show government how possible this is and the contribution of the LSA in a classroom setting. So what they essentially do is this LSA now is supporting the classroom. We have classroom modifications whereby we are looking at ramps for in cases of children with cerebral palsy and they are using special seats or are using wheelchairs and they have to be moved in and out of a classroom setting. So we have the ramps. We have classroom education whereby we have to get appropriate learning materials depending on the need of an individual child. So they do have learning resources. The teacher is trained on the appropriate teaching strategies within the classroom setting, having this child with a sensory disability in class. Again, as we've talked about now, the aspect of making sure that there is curriculum that supports them within the education classroom. Our current education system in the country has two pathways, which is the age-based and the stage-based. Our age-based is what we are calling the competency-based curriculum, and then we have the stage-based pathway, which is for essentially for learners with severe types
Mhm.
of disabilities, whereby they go through other aspects of learning, not purely academic, issues with orientation and mobility, activities of daily living. They're going through social and communication, learning to integrate into the society itself. So they don't fully focus on academic bit, but they are focusing on, independence in the future, looking at independence aspect of it. So our
What
conversation,
time is it in India?
sorry.
That's
So
okay.
essentially, the conversation in making sure that classroom setup is a priority. Lighting issue, again, this is specific to a specific need of a child. So the modification will always start from the head to the bottom, that is from the school principal being on board, on willing to make this necessary modification, because again, these are classrooms that are made by the government. So being on board and the necessary resources, I would say our programming or our interventions come from, we go to institutions that are of very low income households and settings. So you would find that in most cases, these classrooms do not even have windows, doors. So there's a lot of modifications that we have to do in that environmental setting. Yeah.
Okay. So your work is both on administrative level and
Yeah.
also on the teacher level too. Are you going in and actually talking to the teacher and taking a look at the situation and trying to train, maybe is a word, or consult the teacher on how to work with these students?
Yeah, that is actually you've captured it well. Because once we bring in, we want the child enrolled in a classroom setting, our conversation starts with having with the school administration first. Because in some cases, you take a child to a mainstream school, and the school will be like, mm-mm. I would remember there was one time we would go, and the teachers and the school head was like, "This is not a school that belongs to those children. Those children don't belong here." And this translated to our Kiswahili language, it's really obscene, so, or very degrading. So they would look at them that there is no need for inclusive. These are children that belong to that entity. They don't belong here. So there is advocacy first for them to accept, the institutions to accept. And then even if the institution accept, in some cases, the parents, the larger community may not be accepting because of the stigma. So they are like, our children do not need to learn with these other children. I would quote again, these other children in our setting, because of the stigma related to the type of disability that is there. So there's that aspect. So you have to do a lot of community sensitization in that aspect. Then the teacher level now, the trainee. Some teachers will tell you, I wasn't trained in special education. I can't handle a child with disability. Or the classroom number is very huge. So a teacher has like 50, 60 students, and then you expect them to pay special attention to one or two children with disability in that classroom. They will tell you, I do not have the capacity. I do not have
Hmm.
the resources. The institution does not have learning materials, because again, we are more focused on play-based type of learning. So they'll tell you, I do not have the blocks. I do not have the colors. I do not have the paint materials. I do not have everything that this child would benefit from. So it's better if they go to a special school again. So going back to training the teachers, to looking at local materials that they are able to use as play materials, and even using them in the classroom. So there's a lot of training, there's a lot of advocacy, there's a lot of sensitization. And then when we bring in the learning support assistant, again, conversations around, this is the role of the learning support assistant. Because in some cases, again, I would say our institutions are understaffed. So this learner support assistant, again, may be used by the institution as a teacher. So we want to avoid that conversation that would lead to depriving the child that this learning support assistant came for, and them leaving it and going to do and work for other children, because they would look at one child or two children, and we have 50 of the learners that do not have a teacher. So that balance and that conversation usually happens in every institution. Some institutions, in some cases, we are denied. Some
Hmm.
schools will say, no, we are not, we don't have the capacity. So no. And there's nothing you can do about
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the situation that you described is not unique to Kenya. I'm sure there's many countries going through exactly the same
Mm.
situation that you're describing here. And so are there are there are there many students with sight or hearing disabilities that are in mainstream schooling in Kenya?
I would say not really.
Okay.
What has happened, we're still doing institutionalization, and we talk about it as integration, but I think for me personally, I would still say it's segregation. Because if a school of learners with hearing impairment is very far away from learners without disability, so there is a setting, and the conversation is, where do we get sign language interpreters? Where do we get transcribers? Most of them are found in these special schools. So an inclusive school or a mainstream school, number one, would tell you, for one learner or two, or even 5 or 10, we cannot afford to have transcribers or sign language interpreters. Because then again, how our curriculum or teacher training curriculum is made is that you're not trained on special education or inclusive education. Most teachers go to teacher training colleges for a specialization in English, Kiswahili, sciences, and all that, not on how to teach a child with need who needs who is deaf in a classroom setting. So the teacher will not be able to sign at the same time teach. Even in cases, we had a project whereby we were implementing for deaf children. We went to schools that had deaf learners within two counties in the country, but you would find these schools, there were 6 schools. The teachers in that classroom, who is a deaf teacher, a deaf teacher student, or a deaf, sorry, for a teacher who teaches deaf students, they are not even able to sign or interpret in a classroom setting. So there is a very huge gap, because they themselves, their signing is a very big difficulty. So there's a very huge gap. So if the teacher is not able to sign and they are in this quote unquote special school, you can imagine the challenge in an inclusive setting.
Okay, so Faith, and I mean, Kenya's a fairly good sized country. It's
Yeah,
very diverse. You've got your cities and you got your villages. And those specialized schools are only a few. Is that true?
yeah,
And in certain
yeah, very
locations, so
few.
not all students can make it to those schools.
Yeah,
Correct?
true. Yeah, true.
So there has to be. I would think, like particular in the villages, some of those students must have to go to the uh, stream school.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah, they go into the mainstream schools, and in most cases, you'd find the conversation is they are just being moved. They if a parent you go and ask a parent like, how is your child coping in school, or even if you ask the learner themselves, they would tell you they just go to school. Because then again, academically, they are not the teachers do not have the resources or the instructional capabilities to teach these learners. They do not have the specific insight that they need to do this. So the child goes to school, and in most adverse and worse situations, these children drop out of schools and they're not able to continue with their education. So the few who will be able to go just, scope through. They're just, trying and, swimming. It's like they're swimming in a sea of sharks. So they just have to do it just to get to a better level. But then those within the villages and maybe have some information would also opt for special schools, not really an inclusive setting. So you'd find children being in inclusive education setting mostly at ECDE level, the early childhood level. And then when it gets to a phase where they are not able to now survive the education system, they drop out. And that is a
Okay.
very huge case within most children with disability or sensory disabilities per se.
Okay. So again,
Yeah.
we're focusing on students here with sight and hearing. So now I'm concerned from what you're saying.
Hmm.
Yeah, you've got some students. I know there's a
Hmm.
good sized specialty school in Karen in Kenya for the blind,
Hmm.
and who can are lucky though enough to go to a special school, right?
Hmm.
You have some that are basically going to mainstream school, but they're not getting properly
Yeah.
giving inclusive education. Is that true? And you
Hmm.
probably you have a group that probably just drop out, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you got a group that probably don't even go to school at all.
Yeah.
How is your organization handling that situation? I mean, all students deserve the right to, proper education.
I would say it's usually a very big chunk, something we needed to bite on, because then again, you remember we are donor funded, so it depends on the funding that we have, and we really usually really try to reach a large number of children. So I would say when as we look at Kenya itself, I don't know whether you can hear some background noise. If there is any, please let me know. So usually within our country system, we have urban centers, and then we have the rural advanced, the poor, the rural areas. So within the urban centers, we do have private schools and some public institutions. These are government-owned institutions. So what happens is, Adrian,
You're muted, Faith. There you go.
so what, sorry, I was saying I was saying within the urban setting or within the country itself, we have different economical empowerment within the setting or socioeconomic status. So in urban centers, you find that there are very small, private schools that have mushroomed here and there that are supporting children with disabilities. But this is the opposite in rural settings. So our projects work tend to go into the rural setting. Our country, as I said, has counties. From the national government, we have counties. But you see, we are not able to reach to every county. So most of our programming, we are in approximately 10 counties, supporting institutions within, programming within these institutions and supporting children. But then again, we are very key, and we really do a lot of advocacy from within the government and the Ministry of Education to see that this support gets into the schools that we are not able to reach to. So as I had mentioned, the learning support, if this is now taken up by the Ministry of Education, therefore it means every institution in the country is able to hire a learning support for children with disability, therefore capitation and resources given by the government. Secondly, I would say we've worked towards advocating for the curriculum. In as much as it's not implemented, I would say the conversation is towards that. How are we able to do that? So having a curriculum, being a national tool, therefore other institutions are able to replicate it. Working with other organizations, other like-minded organizations within consortia to see how they're implementing and how we are better spaced in making sure that children with disability are receiving education. Again, sensory disabilities. I would say in as much as we're looking at sensory disability, a huge gap is in hearing loss compared to visual loss. A huge gap is in hearing loss. Again, getting hearing aids is quite expensive. For glasses, we do have very many organizations that do give out glasses. But for hearing aids, because of the expensive nature of the hearing aid, we get fairly lots of children not getting hearing, this assistive technology to support them in education. So we try as much as we are working as Sense International, we work with government and we work with other organizations to make sure that we are advancing these voices here.
Okay, so and we're talking about Kenya here, and once again, I think what you're experiencing there is probably experienced in many different countries, the same level, and my impression of Kenya and the education system there is that somewhat progressive and
It
open
is.
and to things. So, but of course, again, our focus here is on Kenya. So I'm thinking too, because we have talked about this before, maybe, and I know Kenya is open to the idea of homeschooling. Is
Yeah.
that something being looked at this point for children with sight and hearing disabilities?
Yes, as we were talking about inclusive education, I think I didn't mention, as Sense International, we are looking at it at both school-based and home-based. What we noticed is over the course of programming is most children with visual loss and hearing loss and deaf blindness are usually left at home because of the difficulties and the functional support that they do need. So what we did is when the new curriculum was developed in the country, which is what we are calling the competency-based education, a conversation after that. We were involved in the processes, and the conversation was, what about our children who have visual loss and hearing loss and are not able to transition to education system? So the conversation was around that, and we were able to now have a curriculum that is called the home-based education curriculum. This is now the part that now it's being piloted. Again, if the Kenyan system education, we are piloting a new curriculum. So there are a lot of challenges, a lot of learnings each and every day that is going on within the country. So the home-based curriculum is what is going to support now the children who are at home, not really essentially even at home, even those who are in hospital-based care, and those who are not able to transition or do not have the support system that they need. What was happening before was more of, yes, it was happening, but they didn't have a guiding framework. They didn't have a curriculum. They didn't have, the way forward on how this is being done. So with this curriculum, this shows that there is now official recognition. It wasn't recognized before officially, but now having this curriculum shows that now the children are recognized. But then also how it's going to work is the children who are in home-based are going to be linked to a nearby mainstream school so that resources in future are able to get to them. In practice, it's not yet happening, but that is in policy and it's recognized. So therefore, it means with a lot of advocacy and resources, we are hoping that this would happen.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
and in your work too, do you work with the parents to make sure that the parents understand what's available for their child?
Yes. We usually say that our family, Sense is a family. Actually, when we talk about Sense, it's a family. We work in a family-based approach. It's family-based approach because when the parent is the primary interventionist, in as much as you would talk about occupational therapist and every other person, a speech therapist and all that, the primary intervener is the parent. And if they are not on board, then there's no interventions that you would give that may be able to work. Because again, if we're talking about a child receiving any type of therapy or going to school, the parent has to agree on it first. So the reason that we work with the parents is after the assessment processes, when we are developing what you're calling an individualized education plan, which is what supports and guides, the type of education or setting support that the child is receiving, they do contribute in the individualized education plan. That is their main role, and they help in first monitoring it, making sure that the learning support assistant is achieving the goals or what they had set together. Secondly, the learner support assistant, the LSA, works with the parent in the intervention itself. Even the OT, the occupational therapist, the speech therapist, works directly with the parent so that once their intervention comes to an end, because what do we say? Maybe even if the therapy takes maybe 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever hours they go, the large chunk of time is spent with the parent. So these interventionists now guide the parent on what to do at home. So therefore, meaning that the role of the parent is really key. But secondly, we've also been able to develop resources and videos. We've curated videos, easy to read materials for parents. So these videos are loaded into tablets, or you're able to find them on YouTube, so that the parent is able to see what they're able to do at home. Very practical, simple, and something that they're able to do from home. But then constantly, we usually meet with parents to see what are their needs, what are the gaps that they're experiencing, what are the challenges. And one of the key challenges that the parent highlighted is, we are talking about our children, we talk about our children, and we forget the parent, the caregiver, the load and the challenges that comes with raising a child with disability. So therefore, we also had to have psychosocial support for the parents themselves. And I will tell you that the changes that you see are very mass. They're very different. Like from the beginning, when you started, when they were really hopeless and all these challenges looking all gloomy, these are very vibrant parents now. They are very, communicative, very expressive. They are now people who are advocating for change within their communities because they have been enlightened. They have a support system. They get a counselor. They themselves they have the solutions within themselves. Again, there is no solution that is very new. The parents within themselves also do have information. So they contribute to whatever we are doing, and they usually guide our working processes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, the parents has to be a key part of this whole thing,
Yeah.
and they need. I think there's a need for educating parents or training or consulting, whatever the word might be, to let them know that they are a key part of it. They're an advocate for their child's education to try and
Yeah.
make sure their child is getting proper education.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, and I will ask you about assistive technology, but I mean, you're telling me there's schools that don't even have windows in them. So, but in the schools that is that readily available in the school system that does have that capability?
I would say when it comes to assistive technology, uh, we had a new law that was passed recently. Now it's a really big win. It's still a challenge, but it's going to be a big win when it comes to assistive technology. Initially, our national health insurance system did not pay for assistive technology. So with the new health insurance, the government's health insurance, at least it's going to be able to pay for a certain percentage of the assistive technology. That is a win first. Secondly, as I said, I would say in our country, poverty and disability almost go concurrently. Reason being, as we understand that, in different causes of disability, there are those that could be preventable and there are those that are not. In most cases, the technology, the AT, when it gets to our country, it's either, imported, or the, big sellers, big corporations, so it's expensive. I would give an instance of an hearing aid. Getting a refurbished hearing aid in the country is like approximately 40,000 Kenya shillings. And we are giving them out for free now, but that is what is happening, 40,000 Kenya shillings. A household that makes like $1 a day is not able to afford to getting these hearing aid if it's needed in the household. When we're talking about other special assistive technology like wheelchairs, special seats, feeding tools, and all these things, it's most cases in most households, it's not a priority. So the parents resort to ways that they are able to do themselves. So they have made homemade ways of assistive technology. So you'd find instead of a child having maybe a wheelchair or a special seat, they have converted a plastic chair or a certain chair in their household to work as an assistive device. But then it becomes a challenge when it comes to school. Again, when it comes to like hearing loss now and visual loss, the learners or the children have adapted to the environment and learning lip reading, tactile ways of learning and auditory learning for the visually impaired. So they are learning how to survive within the context itself. We had currently we have orbit screen readers that are within the country, which are being supplied by KBTA. But then again, the cost is very expensive. So unless a donor comes in and gives it to an institution, then the children are now able to access it. But I appreciate that there are organizations that are working in this. We have Enable, which works at adapting the laptops for learners with visual impairment to be able to use a laptop just in case they are not able to afford an Orbit reader. We do look at when it comes to learners with hearing impairment, you're finding that we are having a lot of youths and teenage youths and young teachers and young professionals now learning sign language, so they're able to support within education system. So it's a challenge, yes, but they are mitigating. There are highlights that are making it to the positive side. Yes, it's expensive, but there are progressive ways that we're looking at, and hopefully, they will be a success.
Super. I want to make sure we leave some time here for anybody who wants to ask questions. But let's kind of give you an opportunity here to explain what changes would you recommend at the school or policy level to strengthen inclusive education for children with sensory disabilities? What is your recommendations?
The first thing I would talk about is probably issues with data. I think conversations when you talk about disability, one of the biggest thing I would say maybe in Africa is, or Kenya essentially, is on data or the numbers when it comes to disability. We currently do not, let me talk about even deaf blindness and hearing loss and visual loss, hearing impairment. We do not have accurate data when it comes to the numbers. And when there is no numbers, then the resources are not allocated. So we need appropriate channels of assessment, diagnosis, and registration purposes. I know our country is really trying so hard, but then the information may not be able to get to the grassroots. And in some cases, people do not see the benefit of registering. But if we don't have data, then we don't get the resources. So a lot of advocacy, I would say, if we have enough data, then maybe we are able to lobby for these implementations of the policy. I would say Kenya has the best policies among the countries that really has very good policies. Our challenge comes when it comes to the implementation aspect of it. But I would say conversations with the different institutions, it's not like they don't want to do it. They are willing.
Faith, you're muted again.
Sorry.
There you go.
I've removed my cursor from
Okay.
So what has happened is, as I was saying, issues with data. Without data, we don't get appropriate resource allocation. So there is really important aspect of having enough data. Secondly, we need to have OPD engagements, organizations of persons with disability. Lived experiences shared a different light, and with a lot of conversations on why there is a need for inclusive learning, why there is need for a certain policies to be implemented, they are able to give us a very, very, very good lived experience. There is no need for a lot of awareness raising, conversations in every spaces. We do have policies, we do talk about it, but then again, what is holding us back is the stigma and discrimination that is related to disability. As you talked about very keenly, Ken, was the aspect of parental involvement. When the parents are involved in this conversation, when the parents are involved in leading for advocacy and championing for the rights of inclusive education and rights of children with disabilities or people with disability, there is a very big milestone that we are able to achieve. Reason being, I look at how mothers that we've worked with are very resilient, are very willing. When in one of our projects, I'll just give an example. In one of our projects, the government was not really forthcoming on employing the occupational therapist, but the parents, held each other's hands and they walked and marched into the county's offices and said, hey, we do need an occupational therapist in this county, because the county didn't have an occupational therapist, not one employed by the government. So they went to the government and said, no, we do need these services. So if they are able to champion for this, and looking at the history of disability, we know how far parents have brought the conversation about disability. And then I would say working with governments are the biggest donors, or they are the budget holders. So the government needs to be in every key space and looking at this and taking it as a priority, because in every child that is ignored and left behind, we are losing so much as a country. So it's really important to have government conversations in this table and holding them accountable, because we may have them in the table, but how are we holding them accountable when they make these promises? So it's really, really, really important. And I would say all institutions working and championing for the rights of disability, there is need to have joint voices, joint advocacy, because not every, we are all fighting for the same thing. So when we hold each other's hands and come together as organization, our voice becomes louder.
Very
Yeah,
good.
thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions for Faith? If you do, well, please raise your hand, and we'll be glad to recognize you. And Daniel?
Hi. I was just wondering what type of tools do you use in the classroom or around the schools for sensory issues? Um, I used to work with a lot of kids with autism and with different types of sensory issues. Sometimes they had chewing toys, or sometimes we used sand or water, play. I, I was just wondering, what type of tools you guys have.
Thank you, Daniel. You've actually mentioned some of the things that we use. We do a lot of, again, localized materials, play from the community, from our surrounding. The environment itself contributes a lot to the resources, and we train the teachers and the interventionists on using the locally available materials to, support the intervention aspect again. We do a lot of auditory materials and tactile materials. So we buy a lot of blocks, a lot of Legos. You call them Legos. We do a lot of Lego. We do a lot of auditory, like, I don't know how we would call them, but we do a lot of audiovisual materials, touch materials. If we're buying books, we, looking at large print, we're looking at resources, very colorful. We get crayons, the plasticines. These are, locally available within the country. I would say again, in as much as they are available, they are not as cheap as we would think. So not every institution is able to afford it. So we buy for the institutions, then they get to implement it. So we have a lot of play materials, and we've been able to actually even set up a play center in one of our communities so that the children with disabilities are able to access play therapy and play learning in that setting. So getting these materials within one environment. So looking at audiovisual aspect of it, tactile, sensory bit of it. In some cases we have to ship them, like the chewies. For children with the weighted blankets, we don't have them in the country. We have to import the chewies, the sensory lights. We also have to import those. Yeah.
Miss Singer?
Yeah, I've loved the presentation that Nyaboke yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's okay.
she
I'll
has
forgive
made.
them.
I feel Kenya and Malawi are almost in the same locality. Thank you. It has been a very good presentation. I'll just make additions and probably ask where I feel I will ask. Number one, the issue of classes, you are talking about, let's say, a class of 50. In Malawi, you have a teacher handling maybe up to 200 learners in a single class. You see? So even if the teacher has skills, this number is just too large even for those learners without disabilities. The other thing which I wanted to hear much and I usually talk about is about attitudinal barriers, either on the part of the teacher, the part of the parent, even the learners themselves. The teacher, if let's say you will say, I cannot handle such a class because I will not have additional money. That is to do with that attitude, not the skills. So advocacy must be done to the teachers again. Again, to the parents. Parents sometimes have lost trust in their children with disabilities because they feel they cannot learn or it's a waste of time. They also need a lot of advocacy. You talked of psychosocial support. Psychosocial support should come on top of them removing negative attitudes towards their children with disabilities. And the learners themselves with disabilities must be taught that they can achieve. They should not look down upon themselves. Then you talked again about these ICT materials like you talked of tablets. That is where my question now is coming. You provide the tablets to schools. Do learners take these tablets to their homes? If they do, are their parents literate enough to help their children use these ICT materials? Or in the substitute, do they have smartphones that they can use in substitute of smartphones to help their learners, especially those with unnoticeable disabilities, the learning disabilities? I would rather hear how you clarify on that one. Thank you. I may not need to say much, otherwise I'll be making your presentation lose the sort which I have acquired. Thank you.
Thank you, Senga. Ken, how do we go about this? Do I answer or we take the rest of the questions, then we are able to go
Yeah,
ahead?
we can. Dr. Sigamoni in South Africa has a question.
Thanks, Nyaboke. So, I think what your presentation reveals is so much of enthusiasm and so much of commitment, which is so important in inclusive education. So I don't want my question to be a distraction, but I just want to ask you the question. As your government, your Ministry of Education, changed their philosophy and their structures, and are the policy papers, or rather the policies, the different policies, are they compatible with inclusive education? That's my question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sigamoni. I really like how you pronounced my name. You got it right. So I'll start with Msenga's question and issues with ICT. We've looked at ICT in two ways, whereby we've provided institutions with the ICT materials where we give all the tablets. We do have a laptop and a projector for the institution. So the teacher takes charge in accessing these resources and taking the learners through the resources that we do have and other materials. We've worked with other partners like Loho Learning, Ikitabu that are within the country and are also working within other African countries to support the children to acquire academic learning. Secondly, when it comes to the parents, what we've gone to do is train the parents on how to use these gadgets. So we do not just give them out and leave it at that. We train the parents on how to use it, link them to a local in person or interventionist who is able to support them when they are having a challenge. So we'll give this tablet, they're either linked to the occupational therapist or to the learning support assistant that we talked about, who is able to guide the parents on how to go about using these resources. Again, most of the people that do have smartphones are able to access the materials itself. But then the reason we give out the digital material is for those who are not able to access internet and YouTube and all this, they're able to have these resources preloaded into their gadgets, so they don't have to access internet. So they are all offline and they're able to go around it, and it's usually very easy steps to get into the resource itself. So we really try and make sure that, for cases of parents that, do not have that level of literacy, are able to still access these materials. And every time the learning support assistant or the occupation, they are going for occupational therapy, they go with their gadget just to explain to the either interventionist on where they're having challenges. So it's not 100%, but I would say around 90% of the time we find that the parents are using the gadgets themselves. Coming to you, Sigamoni, is when it comes to our policies, I would say we really do have very good policies as a country. It does recognize inclusive education. It does advocate for inclusive education. Every conversation that you go with the Ministry of Education is on inclusive education. The challenge is on how to implement it. Where the resources, when starting from the teachers, the teacher training aspect of it, when it comes to the classroom resources, the classroom modification that is needed to, advance inclusive education, going back to the parents and conversations around that, challenge the stigma that is experienced. And then again, people go into back, and even sometimes we are faced with the same questions. How practical is it? How practical is it having children with multisensory impairment in one classroom? When we talk about, again, when we are against institutionalization or segregations, they will still ask, how practical is it having 10 children with cerebral palsy in one classroom, or 10 children with different levels of hearing impairment in a classroom, or a teacher having a learner with maybe like even 3 learners with hearing impairment, 2 with visual impairment, 1 learner with autism in a classroom setting. So the conversation, in as much as you're going, we advocate and we are appreciative of it. The challenge is now how we see the practicality of the situation itself. I don't know if I've been able to answer you, Sigamoni.
Okay, thank you. Hilda? Hello? Oh, Hilda, go ahead. You're muted. Do you want to unmute, Hilda? You need to unmute. Let me ask her to unmute. There she goes. There we
Can
go.
you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yep. Welcome.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Hi, Faith. I loved your presentation, and I just want to acknowledge that you aired out some of my views and some of the things that I go through on a day-to-day basis. Maybe just to introduce myself, I'm a teacher. I come from Kenya, and one of the issues that I have encountered that probably Faith you can help me out with is the issue of autism. Where I work in a private institution, but currently we are receiving almost the same ratio of, let me call them regular learners, to the ones who are coming with some aspect of disability, and mainly autism. How are you, the organization, coming in to assist in advocating for the rights of these children and to encourage inclusion? We realize that most of these children, when they come to school, they're coming as a last resort, meaning that I think it's out of stigma, they're hidden at home. How are we how can we help the parents to accept, and also for the society to acknowledge that disabilities get not to the inability, and that these children can also benefit in the education system that is in place. Number two, how are you guys only focused on public institutions, or are you also in a position to pick up in this private school setup to sensitize parents and also to offer psychosocial support, just like you had mentioned, to the primary caregivers? Kindly just highlight how you can go about it, or if there's any way that Sense International can assist even in these other areas. Not because they're not aware, but because of the stigma that is associated with disability.
Okay. Thank you, Hilda. I love that you're a teacher. I'm also a teacher by training. So, so what happens is, as Sense International, the challenge when it comes to disability is, in a case when you focus in one disability, you would find the other type of disability also coming through. As we said, we work with deaf, blindness, and other multisensory impairment. And in most cases, people are telling us autism also falls under the multisensory impairment due to the senses and the sensory impacts that it comes with autism. We are able to support in some cases, but then it does have to come with high support needs. As I had said, we usually really support parents and caregivers who do have high support needs within the programming aspect of it. Conversations around how to go about the intervention and the support system, especially when it comes to early interventions. I would say Sense International is one of the key gurus when it comes to early interventions within the country. And we are really willing and open to having conversations and how to support your institution. So we'll be able to talk on the sides and see how we'll be able to, guide you and, walk you through the space of psychosocial support and how you're able to implement the same within your institutions.
Okay, hopefully, Hilda, that answers your question. No?
May I allow me, please? Now, in the event that we were to reach out to Sense International, does it have financial implications? The institution that I work with currently does not cater for learners with special needs. However, we have those mild cases that we are able to accommodate. So in the event that we have the severe cases, we've always referred them for screening and assessment at cases. Unfortunately, since we do not have the capacity of having these learners among us within our system, we are often forced to drop them from our system. How can you support or engage institutions to encourage inclusion? Is this an advocacy document that is within your system, or how can you help? Because I believe that there's no special one.
Okay, Hilda, I think most of these we can talk in the private, but what I know is this: we do not have an issue supporting your institution. When it comes to supporting, we may not be able to implement the programs within your institution. The reason we work with government is for sustainability and continuity, and that is where most of our parents, coming from low income, take their children. And that is where we have large numbers and where the government puts in resources as compared to private institutions. So when we are chasing government resources, we have to show them how it works within their setting. Conversations around how to train your teachers and how, being able to make your school settings being inclusive and how to support your teachers, how to give you these teaching instructional guides and walk you through the journey, we are able to have that conversations. I may not be able to speak about the financial implications because as we are an NGO, we do depend on financial donor, donations. But then I would say these I don't think we are money. We are not. I'm not saying I don't think we are. We are not a money-oriented organization. What we'll have to do is just work within the specs and see what is possible as an organization and what we are able to do together. That's the much we can do. We will not ask you for money. We will just find that will be our time to see how we are able to support you, but we'll not ask you to pay. Okay.
I appreciate that very much, Faith. Maybe I'll engage you on the side.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you. So, so Faith, coming to the end of the meeting here. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions, but somebody may want to get in touch with you or get in touch with your organization. How do you recommend they do that?
Ken, I think you do have my email. You may be able to share it with those who want to reach out to us as an organization. They can also go to Sense International page, and they are able to, reach out to us. And, our contact information is there. We have our LinkedIn page, our Facebook page, our Twitter account. You're able to reach out to us, and we are very active. Another thing is, one thing that I forgot to mention, we do have a global resource hub that has materials and resources on supporting, children, youths, and adults with deaf, blindness, and other multisensory impairments. I'll be able to copy in the link to the Global Resource Hub on the chat so that anybody who wants to, peruse and look at the Resource Hub and get more information and maybe even give us feedback or would want, if you have resources and you would want us to share within the Global Resource Hub, would be beneficial for both us and the people that we're supporting. Thank you.
Okay, good, very good. Thank you. You sit and you listen, and sometimes you say, "Wow, it's overwhelming," but it can't be overwhelming. We can't let it as advocates be overwhelming to us. And if we may be looking at the big picture, it's overwhelming, but we got to look at each individual student, and if we can help one student at a time, we've accomplished a lot. So we can't get overwhelmed by it, and we can't get this. As advocates, we're going to get discouraged. There's no question. The days you're going to be
Sunny,
discouraged, but you have to bounce back from that too. So, um, you know, you've got a big task there, and thank God for people like you that are doing this kind of work. I do want to recognize Sheelan. Sheila, you came in a little after you started speaking, Faith, but she's our other new member here in the club. Sheila, are you there? She may not be, but once again, she has vast abilities that we're looking forward to, and we certainly need that too, because we're working on a global level on all this kind of work. So if there are no other questions, for today. I appreciate you all being here and listening to this discussion, and hopefully you come away with some food for thought, and we'll take it back with you to your own organizations in your own countries, and continue to work to improve to make sure that students of all disabilities are learning without boundaries, without borders. I'm sorry, without borders. So thank you all, and I appreciate it, and all have a good day. And hopefully we'll see you again next time.